curriculum of 50, 40, or even 20 years ago. Children today are able to learn about the British Empire and colonialism, about the transatlantic slave trade and its abolition, and of how our history has been shaped by people of all ethnicities, as well as having the opportunity to study non-European cultures such as Mughal India or the Benin Empire, which is where my ancestors decided to have their own opportunity to take over the world in their own way. Pupils can currently study migration empires and the people in the AQA History GCSE, for example. The member for Ilford North is quite wrong to say that that's the only place that it can be learned. There are many other exam bodies that do offer this. But our curriculum does not need decolonising for the simple reason that it is not colonised. We should not apologise for the fact that British children primarily study the history of these islands. And it goes without saying that the recent fad to decolonise maths, decolonise engineering, decolonise the sciences that we have seen across our universities to make race the defining principle of what is studied is not just misguided, but actively opposed to the fundamental purpose of education. Both sides of the house is what necessarily must be taken out. Perhaps we'll get to that on another day. Members such as the member for Islington North and many others have raised the Black Lives Matter movement. The member for Streatham raised the education guidance and believes that we're trying to stop children from becoming activists. I believe another member, apologies, I've forgotten who it was who mentioned it. However, what we are against is the teaching of contested political ideas as if they are accepted facts. We don't do this with communism, we don't do this with socialism, we don't do it with capitalism. And I want to speak about a dangerous trend in race relations that has come far too close to home to my life, and it is the promotion of critical race theory, an ideology that sees my blackness as victimhood and their whiteness as oppression. I want to be absolutely clear, this government stands unequivocally against critical race theory. Some schools have decided to openly support the anti-capitalist Black Lives Matter group, often fully aware that they have a statutory duty to be politically impartial. Black lives do matter, of course they do, but we know that the Black Lives Matter movement, capital BLM, is political. I know this because at the height of the protest, I saw white Black Lives, I've been told of white Black Lives Matter protesters calling, and I'm afraid I apologize for saying this word, calling a black armed police officer guarding Downing Street a pet nigger. That is why we do not endorse that movement on this side of the House. It is a political movement, and what would be nice would be for members on the opposite side to condemn many of the actions that we see this political movement instead of pretending that it is a completely wholesome anti-racist organization. There is a lot of pernicious stuff that is being pushed, and we stand against that. We do not want to see teachers teaching their white pupils about white privilege and inherited racial guilt. And let me be clear, any school which teaches these elements of critical race theory as fact, or which promotes partisan political views such as defunding the police without offering a balanced treatment of opposing views, is breaking the law. Our police force is not their police force. Since its establishment by Robert Peel, our police have operated on the principle of policing by consent, and it gives me tremendous pride to still, in 2020, live in a nation where the vast majority of our police officers are unharmed. On the history of black people in Britain, again, our history of race is not America's history of race. Most black British people who have come to our shores were not brought here in chains, but came voluntarily, due to their connections to the UK and in search of a better life. I should know I am one of them. And we have our own joys and sorrows to tell. From the Windrush generation to the Somali diaspora, it is a story that is uniquely ours. And if we forget that story, to replace it with an imported, Americanized narrative of slavery, segregation, and Jim Crow, we erase not only the history of Black Britain, but the history of every other community that has contributed to this society and has also been a victim of racism or discrimination, from the Pakistani community to the Jewish community. On delivering a race equality strategy, I've listened to members opposite talk about a race equality strategy. They know that this government has set up a commission on race and ethnic disparities, but they have not engaged with it. They don't want a race equality strategy. What they want is for the government to adopt their race equality strategy, and that's not what we're doing. Mr. Speaker, we won an election just a year ago. I'm afraid I don't have enough time to give way. Mr. Speaker, we won an election a year ago. If members on the other side want to implement their race equality strategy, they should go ahead and win an election, win the support of the British people, and then they can have their way. But at the moment, this is a Conservative government, and we are going to do this in the way that we believe the people of this country want. I'm afraid I'm not giving way. I've only got 3 minutes, and I have more than 3 minutes of context, of content. Mr. Speaker, in her speech, the member for Brent Central says she hoped I'd learn something from her. Now it's time for me to give her a couple of lessons too, although I don't believe she's in her place. She said in her speech, we need to look at history and we need to improve it. Lesson number 1, you cannot improve history, you can only learn from it. What we can improve is the future, and that is what this government has been doing over the last 10 years. I won't reel out statistics in the interest of time. Other members on this side of the House have already done so. Lesson number 2. Black history is not the history of institutional racism. Listening to some members across the House, it's quite clear that they don't know the difference. It is not true, as the member for Liverpool Riverside said, that African history was interrupted by slavery. Also shows an ignorance of geography, because West African history is different from African history. As probably the only member of this House who actually grew up and went to school in Africa, I can tell you that's not what we're taught. Much more is taught about the history of black slave traders who existed before and after the transatlantic slave trade. In fact, the most notable statue in the city of Lagos, where I grew up, is that of Madam Tinubu. It's the biggest one. It's now equivalent to Trafalgar Square. She was a slave trader, but she was also a freedom fighter and a much-loved icon. Her slave trading is not celebrated, but her fight against colonizers is. In Nigeria, she's recognized as a complex character, as all historical figures are, and heaven help anyone who would try to pull her statue down. There is much that we can learn from Nigeria about how to handle the issue of statues. But why does this issue mean so much to me, Mr. Speaker? It's not just because I'm a first-generation immigrant. It's because my daughter came home from school this month and said to me, we're learning Black History Month because every other month is about white history. This is wrong, and this is not what our children should be picking up. These are not the values I have taught her. They are instead yet another sign of the pernicious identity politics that looks at individuals primarily as groups of biological characteristics. People often don't realize when it has taken hold, and I know that many of them are well-meaning. But what I really want to finish with is the story of Tom Molyneux. He was a black boxer who freed himself from slavery in the US, and he moved to England in 1809. I would have said so much more, but I'm out of time, Mr. Speaker. But what his story tells us is that this is a country that welcomes people, and that black people from all over the world have found this to be a great and welcoming country. These are the values as a black woman I'm teaching my black daughter. We must never take it for granted. And this Black History Month, let us celebrate the black talent we are blessed with, the progress we have made in accepting one another, and the contribution black people have made in making us who we are as a nation. Thank you.
Kemi Badenoch drops political bombshell in Parliament as she delivers a fiery and uncompromising defense of the UK education system, triggering a major debate over Black Lives Matter, critical race theory, and the future direction of the national curriculum. In her speech, she firmly rejects claims that British schools are failing to teach Black history, arguing that the modern curriculum has already evolved far beyond what it was decades ago. She highlights that students today learn about the British Empire, colonialism, the transatlantic slave trade, and its abolition, alongside a wide range of global histories including Mughal India and the Benin Empire. Badenoch stresses that British education is already diverse and inclusive in content, and she pushes back strongly against the idea that it requires decolonizing, insisting that the curriculum is not and has never been colonized in the way critics claim. As the debate intensifies, she argues that the curriculum has limited time and structure, meaning educators must make careful decisions about what is included and what is not. She challenges opponents to explain what subjects or topics they would remove in order to add more content, framing the issue as one of balance rather than expansion alone. Badenoch then shifts the focus toward what she describes as a growing ideological trend in education, particularly the promotion of contested political ideas as established fact. She draws comparisons with how schools do not teach ideologies like communism, socialism, or capitalism as unquestioned truths, arguing that political neutrality in education is essential. She further escalates her criticism by addressing the Black Lives Matter movement and critical race theory, stating that while racism is a serious issue that must be addressed, schools should not promote political activism or ideological frameworks as fact. She argues that importing American racial narratives into the UK context risks distorting British history and undermining the country's unique social and historical development. Badenoch defends the principle of policing by consent in the UK and emphasizes that British institutions should be understood within their own historical context rather than through external comparisons. In her closing argument, she highlights the diversity of British Black history, referencing communities such as the Windrush generation and Somali diaspora, and stresses that Black British experiences are not defined by a single narrative of slavery or oppression. She warns against simplifying history into rigid, identity-based categories and argues that doing so risks erasing the contributions of multiple communities, including Pakistani and Jewish communities who have also faced discrimination. Badenoch also defends the government's approach to race policy, pointing to the Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities and arguing that political opponents have not properly engaged with it. She concludes by reinforcing her core message that history should be learned from, not rewritten, and that Black history should not be reduced solely to institutional racism. Drawing on her personal background, she reflects on growing up in Africa and witnessing the complexity of historical figures and narratives. She shares a personal example involving her daughter's school experience to illustrate her concerns about identity-based teaching. Ultimately, she calls for a more balanced, inclusive, and historically grounded approach to education that recognizes the full contribution of Black people and other communities to British society while preserving national unity and shared values.